The Australian Curriculum Studies Association would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands and the waterways from where we are all meeting today. We pay our respects to the elders past and present, and we extend our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. We value the contributions of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples to education and their continued support of the teaching and learning of all Australians. We recognise that for thousands of years, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have been the first teachers, and that we are committed to continue our learning alongside them. Welcome back, listeners and viewers, to our conference conversations. So this is really exciting because we have this online conference that people are able to access, which showcases the many wonderful work of not only scholarship and academics here in Australia, but also those on the ground working in those classrooms, creating the magical experiences for students. Now, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome Michael Caldwell here today, who is the school principal at Kingsley Montessori School here in Perth. Now, just a little bit of background to Michael. He really believes in independence over rote learning, which is a very good topic at the moment, considering our educational landscape. He believes in learning and passion over knowledge. And he is a director, an influencer, and crucially, a disruptor of education. So all those kind of key things we want to talk about. And he wants to challenge you to think about your teaching. So welcome, Michael. We're going to be delving into some really key aspects, but what I really like is you're talking about why greatness cannot be planned and looking at how do we explore and navigate education in lessons, but from large systems to create those effective programs that really are what our students will benefit from, and how do we create those skills for our students to thrive. So yeah, let's get into this conversation.
Okay, so I think this sort of started. I read a book called Why Greatness Cannot Be Planned a while ago, and it was around the same time that I was actually training to be a strongman. So my other great joy in life is fitness as well as education.
Okay.
And so my degree is actually in sports science, and so I was training to do strongman. And if you've ever watched strongman, it's kind of like if world wrestling met powerlifting. Everything has to look impressive when you pick it up, and it has to be heavy. And so in my training for that, I was very, very, very scared of the log press. That was the thing that I really didn't think. It was the thing that I was like most scared of everything. It was the thing that I trained the most for. So there were 5 events. There's a yoke walk, where basically you put something on your shoulders and carry it very far. There was the log press. There was the deadlift, a sandbag toss. We had to throw a sandbag over a very high height, and then a sandbag carry. And my training focus was mainly on the overhead strength for this log press. And I did lots of work. And on the day, my yoke walk didn't do very well, and I actually got a DNF in that. My log press, I got a DNF in that as well. And the things that I didn't train were the deadlift, the sandbag toss, or the sandbag carry. And those were the things that I performed the best. For context, the yoke walk was also something that I had practiced in the gym as well. So I was actually quite confident about that. And when I did the log press, I was going into the competition very confident for that. But the things that I didn't practice were the things that I did the best at. And that was a real, I'm not sure why that happened. At the time, I just happened to be reading another book called Why Greatness Cannot Be Planned, and another one after that I read called The Tyranny of Metrics. And so what I thought was, well, actually, the problem I had here was that I was trying to maximize my efficiency on one objective and wasn't thinking about anything else. And as a result, that objective became my worst measurement.
Yes. Yeah.
And if I feel that that's a really big lesson for what happens in education quite a lot. So part of my job is to look at things like NAPLAN analysis, and so I do that. That's what I do at the moment. That's as the co-principal. So our model at our school is we have 2 principals. I oversee the high school stuff, and Kate oversees my colleague Kate Tuttle. She oversees the primary school things, and we sort of manage staff in that way. But there's other things where our strengths, I'm more stats based, where she's more arts based. So I'll look at like the stats and things like that. And I've always done that. I've always looked at NAPLAN metrics in the past. I have found that as a general rule, when I reflected on this, If you do really badly in maths, what you'll do in a school is you'll focus everybody's attention on maths. And maths may get better the year after, but what happens to everything else? And so we kind of don't think of things as big systems. We think of things as small, easy to fix. And there's merit to that to a point. I believe there's definitely things like keystone logs. There are things that's when you improve one little thing, it can make a massive impact on other things. And so I just kind of want to talk around those ideas. And so the idea is that we start off with Goodhart's law. So Goodhart's law is when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. So effectively, when a system manipulates itself and its behavior to maximize efficiency towards one objective, there's detriments outside of that that we don't often perceive or predict. And so what I'd like to talk about today is really, can we get better at predicting what will happen when we focus on single objectives?
Yeah.
So to that end, if we talk about a couple of case studies in history, a famous one is the Wright brothers, who famously obviously figured out how to first manned flight. They, in the history books, they are absolutely the underdogs in this story. So they were up against a man called Samuel Langley. Samuel Langley had developed unmanned flight pretty easily and had figured out how to get things to fly. And he got the backing of the US military and the US government. He had loads and loads and loads of money behind him, lots of manpower behind him, all the best engineers in the world. And their approach to it was, well, we just need to get more power behind our things, and then that will work. So he made bigger and bigger engines to make things fly.
Yeah.
Now, if you look then, secondly, against the Wright brothers owned a bike shop, and they're basically made their money through printing. They were a self-funded entity, and their only resources and were just observations that they had around the world. So they basically, what they had was ingenuity. And what they did was they developed wind tunnels, and they used wind tunnels as like small scale experiments, and then they scaled up what they did. And so all their research was into gliders.
Yeah.
And what they did that was very different to what Langley did was they did lots of rapid prototypes. And they spent somewhere in the region of $1,000 at that time, so which is about $40,000 in real money, in our terms, and in all of their research and everything. And they managed to achieve unmanned flights. So we look at that and go, what's the difference between those two things? Langley had somewhere in the region of $3 million behind him, and he just couldn't get anything to get off the ground, and he failed spectacularly, and it was all over the newspapers and everything. And effectively, the Wright brothers prevailed because their focus was on stuff that you can't really measure. Wind tunnels are phenomenally difficult to measure the physics behind and the maths behind, especially when you're the ones who basically prototype that as an idea. But what you do is you observe. You use your observations to see what happens to the smoke, and that's effectively what they did. And because they looked at things from a different perspective, they looked at it as a whole system. They were able to get the first manned flight, whereas Langley was looking at things from a very simple objective. More power means faster airplanes, which means things will go and get off the ground. So that's our first case study. We can look at another case study which I really like, which is the Google and their AI. Whenever the early days of AI, obviously we're still in the early days, but we're a little further along the road than we were at that time. So Google's AI, in one of the early experiments, was they wanted to take on chess. So they took on the greatest chess computer of the time, which was Stockfish.
Yeah.
And Stockfish, the way Stockfish worked was basically on a maths model. They took Stockfish worked on it, basically figured out moves that would take the strongest pieces first, and then basically you would lose by a war of attrition as a result. So it was a very objective objective focus. Your idea is that you take out whatever your biggest piece is as early as possible, and then once you've got that advantage, it's very difficult to win from that position if you play any kind of chess. Google went with a different approach. What they did was they taught their AI the rules of chess, and they gave their AI 3 hours to play against itself. So it played thousands of games in 3 hours. And so it learned all its lessons just by doing that. That was it. That's all it did, was play chess and see how many times it won. And they played 100 games of Stockfish versus Google, and Google beat Stockfish something like 28-0. So 72 games ended up in a draw, and 28 games Google beat Stockfish. And so at
Yeah.
that time, Stockfish was something like 800 ranking points above the nearest human. It was the greatest chess computer ever, and Google beat it. And all it did was 3 hours of preparation playing against itself.
Yes.
And I really like that as a model again of like, well, Stockfish's sole objective was numbers, focusing on the biggest and best numbers, whereas Google's objective was just to play beautiful chess, just play the game
Yes.
and see what happens. And when the grandmasters looked at the games, they said Google actually plays chess the way classical chess players used to play,
Yes.
and in the glory days of chess. So it played much more like a human. And the lesson there was that when you learn like a human, you're more likely to achieve things. So
Yeah.
whenever things are not objective based and they're more holistic, then things tend to be much better.
And
I think every teacher knows that.
Yes.
You know, every
And it's
teacher goes into it
interesting.
knowing that.
Yeah, and it's interesting you talk about Google because it was obviously like DeepMind, which was, I think, Demis Hassabis, who, and if anyone's ever listened to his Desert Island Discs, which was BBC, having been himself a very high-level chess player, it makes sense that he brought that a lot of the time into AI, you know, and I think that was a wonderful thing. And if you listen to him, he's such a beautiful speaker as well and very relatable. So yeah, I think I can actually fully see that. And when you're talking about that and maybe the people who are behind it, it's really about those people and their values and who they are, which help a system to work effectively. And what was lovely when you talked about the Wright brothers, for me in my head, coming from a teacher perspective, I'm going, there was two of them. There was a collaboration. There was somebody to bounce ideas off.
Yeah.
There was conversation. Whereas when you're sometimes alone, and even though you're part of a team, but the pressure is on one person to have all the knowledge and the framework, and maybe that person does as much as the Wright brothers had, but somebody beside you who works and kind of pushes you into uncomfortable spaces or challenges you, you're in a much more effective work productivity as well, and how effective you can be.
Absolutely. Yeah. You don't want having someone who just is surrounded by yes men, which I imagine being in the military, that probably was what happened.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And
there's a hierarchy.
And I think I think both of those stories are really good because yes, Google obviously has the money compared to Stockfish in that story. So it's not about a conversation around like having more money is bad or having whatever. That's not the point. The point is it's how you approach it. It's not what you have, it's what you do with that is really important.
Yes.
And similarly, though, I also don't think that throwing more money at a problem is ever the way to fix it. Because it's, you know, I think in education, you know, there's conversations around money right now and what's going on in terms of like the fully funded model. And I just don't think that's the solution. It's lovely and it's a great idea. And absolutely, the more money you put into children, the better everybody else is. That's absolutely important. But there will be a cutoff point where adding more money won't make it better, and it will just make it more inefficient.
Yes.
And I think teachers need to remember that. They need to go, yes, this is brilliant, fantastic. The government is behind you. Now think about what you're going to do with that money, because what's going to happen, I guarantee, in 5 years' time, or 6 years' time, there'll be a change of government at some point, and they'll go back and they'll go, well, look at all this money we wasted on this, and nothing happened. And and that's the thing that goes around, and you kind of have to get rid of all that concept and just go, well, what have I got in front of me, and what's my job? What do I need to do?
Yeah, and that's very much teacher autonomy, isn't it? And really the value in supporting the teacher as an individual, as a person, and their skill sets coming into a role, you know. And I think there's a lot of conversation at the moment of this unification or federal joining together of a one size fits all. And in some ways that's really difficult for schools like yourself who take on a very different pedagogy and really are successful without having to conform in this sense of this is how you teach, this is the evidence, do it. That's right. And that's really important, because if we don't have that, you know, we're not providing the best for everyone. And we know that some children work in different environments, and we have to support that and not think, as a school as well, But we provide all of this when you actually sometimes it's just not the right fit for someone.
Absolutely, yeah.
We can
Absolutely.
offer. Yeah.
Yeah. I think like, because obviously in a Montessori education, we have the benefit of having a curriculum that's well over 100 years old and a methodology
Yeah.
that's well over 100 years old, has been tried and tested.
Yeah.
And, our measurements are all qualitative rather than quantitative. I
Yeah.
think that's, for me, that's what's always been like the draw card for Montessori, is that we value the qualitative, we value the immeasurable over the measurable.
Yeah.
Like our school, we do NAPLAN and we use it, and it's just one of the tiny tools that we have that we measure things by. And we do our measurements on a daily basis through objective.
Yes.
Our objectives are to look at observation of the child and looking at what the work that they do on a daily basis is. Yeah, and I think that's kind of what's beautiful about it is, and I think the other thing is that I think most Montessori schools, when we've just done re-registration this year,
Yes.
and when we were doing the evidence for, like, we've no evidence for any of this measurable stuff. What are we going to do? And we panicked, and we're like, well, every other Montessori school has the same problem. So
Yeah.
obviously they've got through it. So we'll get through it too. And when we sat down and Kate and I reflected on things, we kind of looked, I said, well, all those jobs on the shelf were created by Montessori. So how many millions of children have done those jobs? So you talked about a standardized test.
Yeah.
This is a standardized assessment. There's millions of children have done this, and this is the outcome that they have achieved. So we know what a good outcome is, and we know when it's not achieved. So even if the measurement is just completed or incomplete, mastery, which is what we look at, or developing, that's a scale, and that's still something that you can measure. And so I think that's always one of the pitfalls of standardized assessment, is that you never really have a sample size large enough to say that this is a standardized test.
And what's beautiful about Montessori is that it's not specific to a country. It is worldwide. So you are really looking against lots of metrics, and you can do it at a very, your system level within a country. But the fact is Montessori hold the same values wherever country you go to. So have to adapt to the metrics while still staying very true to what Maria Montessori wanted, isn't it? That kind of value. And I think that's something that has got the longevity and allows you to say, these are effective systems, but they're, contextual to who we are at a school.
Absolutely. And the fact that she thought of it as a system, like she hasn't designed this as just separate, isolated entities. They're all interconnected in some way. And, anecdotally, if you ever speak to any principals at any other Montessori schools, and they go, we stopped doing this one thing, and 3 months later, we found out why we were doing that thing. And then we had a real problem trying to reintroduce it. So it's one of those things that, like our school is very much we're considered to be like a purity in the terms of the way that we do our Montessori method, but everything's just slow and considered. We don't make changes without long discussion, and there aren't, and that's quite challenging sometimes. And it's not the easy way to do things, but we feel it's the right way to do things.
Yeah.
And the reason for it is because once you remove something from a system, it's very difficult to bring it back. And that's the thing. Like I really like, that's why I do think like a big part of my whole career, I've been thinking about systems big and small in terms of like what they tend to do. And as a general rule, systems fight back against change. They always work towards the median. And that was really frustrating for me as an early years teacher, like in the early days of my career. I'm like, I'm this disruptor, let me do these whatever mad crazy things, and then the system would like be, oh, this is really good, and then it would fight back and go, but look at these test results, look at this, look at that, and then it would, and I needed to be brought into check, don't get me wrong, like my ego needed a bit of a reining in some respects. So like that's what the system does. But also any teachers that are like looking at, say, the bigger education department as a system and going, we need change, we need reform. Yeah, but it's not going to happen like that. It's going to take more than just, and every time you fight against it, it's going to push back against you, because that's what a system, it's a very robust system, the department there. And I like, respectfully, I think it's a good thing. Just like the administrative things that they have in there are phenomenal. Like any independent school will tell you that they are jealous of the admin that the department has, because it's a long-standing, well developed, well built system, and
Yeah.
that's what it is, and it meets certain needs. And whilst I'm not, I've got plenty of criticisms of the Department of Education, plenty of criticisms of mainstream education, but I would hate to live in a country that didn't have it.
Yes. And
And that's really important to remember too.
and we've all been in that staff room, and you go in and the older members of staff will say, "Ah, it'll come around again. This is going to come around. We've been here before. This
Yeah,
happens, and then we go back to this." And it's true, we do fall back into. And it's difficult because I think it's more about content sometimes than the pedagogy. So we've got a new concept, and we've got to bring in something new. And therefore, when we bring something in new, which is in terms of content, we need to have a whole reform around that. So we're going to actually tackle the pedagogy. We're going to tackle what our resources are. We're going to tackle everything, as opposed to sort of going, well, what have we got in place that's already working that we can actually just incorporate elements of? Because we
yeah,
see these off the shelf products that promise us huge things, and then long term, as you mentioned before, sometimes that long term it doesn't work out. It's got that immediate impact, but does it have a long term benefit? And that's quite tricky to
yeah.
navigate.
Very difficult. It's incredibly. I think like there's. I don't want to say an arrogance to Montessori, but there's a confidence to Montessori
Yeah.
educators as well. Like whenever education comes along and says this is the research, this says this happens, and we go, isn't that a wonderful idea that we've been doing for the last 100 years? And I think like that's the testament to Montessori as a person. Like
Yeah.
she genuinely was a genius. There's no other word for her.
Mm.
She like her observations are being shown time and time and again through neuroscience and whatever research in education that her methods were exactly right, because she went with the child first.
Yes.
And well, what does the what like I think the problem with the curriculum is not the content. I think everybody looks at the curriculum and goes, what do the children need to know? And what Montessori did was she just stopped at what do the children need?
Yeah.
And then afterwards, what can I get them to learn as a result
Yeah.
of that? So she was very good at going, these are the needs of the children. I'm going to give them activities that meet those needs. Now, while we've done that, how far can I take their learning when they're in that state? Like teaching 3-year-olds how to write. She was very good at going, I think like a sort of an analogous metaphor for this is looking at, when you teach babies to sign, and they can sign like milk, and they can sign,
Yeah.
I need my mommy. My son did this, mommy and milk, all the time. That was
Yeah.
his
the
bread and butter.
style. Yeah.
But because he doesn't have his throat doesn't develop well enough, and his voice box doesn't develop well enough yet for him to actually speak and make words, and he hasn't got that, but he understands what he needs, and so he can communicate through other methods. That's good. That's exactly what that is. Montessori recognized that as well, that children can recognize letters and they can recognize numbers. And if you've got children, you'll know that your 3-year-old can recognize numbers, can recognize letters, but really struggles to hold a pen.
Yeah.
Pens are artificial implements that we've created to do whatever, and that's quite an advanced skill. So what she did was, well, what I'll do is I'll develop their strength in this by using tweezers and like other things, or we move things from one place to another. And I'll teach them the letters with their finger. We'll just give them some sand and some letters, and they can just write letters like that. And I'll teach them other elements like the phonetic alphabet, and I'll teach them on the phonetics of learning, and they'll be able to read. So even though they can't write yet because they haven't developmentally got it, intellectually they have that capability. And I think that's what's really great about it, was that it's not that she had a belief in children that they could do whatever they set their mind to, but the difference was she figured out what they could set their mind to and adapted her program based on that. And I do think that that's a big problem. I don't think the curriculum itself is a problem. I don't think we have a content problem or an information problem. No. We live in an age of information. That is not the problem. The problem is we see it as a thou shalt do this, and you will never veer from this holy text. That is the curriculum. I do think that's a big problem, because again, that's that narrow focus of the objective. That is this Machiavellian reward is what happens. You get if you can get students to pass an exam to a really high standard, that's rewarded. But at what cost? Is that the best thing for that child? For some, yeah, absolutely. They those who thrive on academia and love learning and have a passion for that, absolutely, that's the best thing. But is that the best thing for everybody? I think that's a big part of the problem, is that we have an objective and it's a
Mm,
very narrow focus. And for whatever, it doesn't matter who you, and I don't know if that's a teaching problem or an education problem or a societal problem, or that's probably too big of a thing to actually narrow
mm,
down. But I do feel that that's a real issue. I
yeah,
think so. I've where's my notes here? I've got so objectives they're too short sighted whilst being well intentioned. And what
yeah,
happens is that you figure out teachers love to teach to a test because that's the most efficient way to teach people, which is valid, absolutely valid,
and
but only if
yeah,
the test is valid. Is
and
that
how
assessment what you're
much.
looking for?
And that's very much as well where we see, we talked about, I talked about before about teacher autonomy. And I think we get caught up in the trap of thinking that because our students have done well, that's a reflection on us as teachers. And we see that all the time, that, oh, I must be a good teacher because my kids did really well. So I've taught them better than the next class, or my NAT plan results were better than this, or that, and that you get caught up in that competitive element and you then lose the focus of the child. And it's not because that teacher doesn't think of the child first. It's because sometimes we've set up the system where for the teacher itself, it's all about data and statistics and what they can do. And I think that's a really hard one because I don't think teachers go in intentionally thinking that way, but the
No.
system pushes them into that way.
And, and I get it. It's a beautiful moment when your child,
Mm.
the student that you've worked with alongside for the last number of
Mm.
years, achieves what they
Yeah.
achieve whatever you want, your 99th percentile.
Mm.
We do the IB, so I'm not even sure anymore what the ATAR is. But yeah, when you go to that ATAR of
Yeah.
99.9, you go, that's amazing. Like what an incredible achievement. But I think it's too easy to get caught up in that was my achievement. It's not.
Yes.
Like, it's
Yeah.
their achievement. It's always their achievement. You were just there, and if it wasn't you, it could have been anybody else. And that's really humbling and important to remember, that
Mm.
actually you were just there as a guide. You were
Yeah.
just there for the journey, and your objective was, here's the content that you must learn, and I'm here to support you in whatever way it
Yeah.
is. But you must do the work,
Yes.
and my job is to make it fun and interesting for you so that we
Mm.
enjoy that work and we find the joy. And that's another thing. I think that's a big lesson that I've learned as a teacher, that Montessori always talked about the joy in the work, and that's true for both the students and the teacher. You must
Yes.
find the joy in what you do, and the joy cannot be found in a curriculum document. I've looked;
Yeah.
it's not there.
No.
Um,
And you probably more, you'll understand as well when you're in a sort of an independent sector as well, where parents have actually chosen the way the work or that school specifically on a lot of values. And I remember when in principal role talking to staff about the fact that parents have actually entrusted you with some of the 8 hours of a day, sometimes with the most important thing in their lives. And you have to bear that in mind, that their investment is, so when they're emotional or something's happened, it's because they really are invested in that education system. And that's that's not just an independent sector, but I think we in independence feel that pressure because there's a monetary all attached. But in any kind of teacher in the classroom, you're looking after the most important thing in someone's life. And what a
yeah,
responsibility, but also what an absolute pleasure and joy that is to be
absolutely. Yeah.
part of it.
And it's not just, to take that point even further. Like, it's not just that they've chosen your school on at the very least, termly basis. They've chosen
Mm,
your school, like, because at
yeah.
any given moment they have another option.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There is another, at any given moment. There's always a path to go to another place,
Yeah.
and that's free, and
Mm,
will do an
yeah.
all right job of educating your child. So, like, they're choosing you, and they're choosing yours, so that it becomes a lot more personal then. And that's quite
Yeah.
difficult to get your head around, I think,
Mm,
which is the biggest difference between, I think, the independent sector and the public sector.
mm,
And is that
yeah.
there is a choice there. And there's advantages and disadvantages to both.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the biggest challenge of the public sector itself, is that a lot of children are not choosing to be there. And that's quite
Yeah.
challenging as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And we're seeing that a lot with those who are struggling to get to school or attend school. And maybe there's a little bit of systems element in there, but have we lost along the way? You talked about it before, the joy of learning and the joy of being in the classroom. And, most of us will always look back at our favorite teachers, not because we went down that pathway or became a scientist, because it's often not the science teacher who inspired you. It could be the English teacher, and not because of the content you taught. Yes, you still remember Macbeth or whatever it would be, but it was actually your relationship to that teacher and the passion that they showed, the fact that they turned up and had that passion and would go all out to provide an experience for you. That was what you remember often, which pushes you into the next stage of your learning.
Yeah, that's that old adage. They don't, hold on, what is it? Children don't care about how much you know until they know how much you care. Like
Yeah.
that's really like, and that's kind of like the crux of it. And I think that's, again, that's sort of more, again, why greatness can't be planned. You don't look at a curriculum first, you look at the child first. Like
Yes.
if you don't care, then it doesn't matter what the content is. It's absolutely irrelevant. And don't get me wrong, you can spoon fed people and you can get them through exams. But are you really, is that the service that you want to provide? Is the ability to pass an exam? Like, I just don't see the value of that skill personally beyond once you're a year 12. It's such a small part of education. Even at university, it's such a small part of your thing. Your finals are where everybody knows what it's like being at uni in your third year and you've got your finals. You just cram your information into your head for 6 weeks and then you write it down in an essay, and then a lot of that content you never really look at again. And if I reflect on my degree, I think like the best part of my degree was the thesis. Like all the time there, the thesis, the 10,000 word essay where you're doing the real work, that's where you learned everything. And I did mine in biomechanics, and now I'm a physics teacher. I found my joy in the maths, and I never really enjoyed maths up to that point. But whenever I was given a real context, and I was like, well, I actually genuinely need to figure out the mathematics behind this 3D model that I was trying to produce, and I was massively out of my depth. But that's like where I found my joy at uni. It was like the thing that I find the most value in was how difficult that was. But because it was real and had real context and my passion and to be fair to my lecturers, I had the professor of biomechanics. He was my tutor. What do you call it? He was my tutor, and who oversaw it. And he was just so passionate about biomechanics and really helped me through the maths and everything. And that's the thing that I remember. I don't really remember much of any of the other lectures or the lecturers. And I think that's a real shame too about education. That of my entire education, I remember those 3 or 4 months. And that's the thing that I valued the most. And again, it was the skills that I was taught up that, not the content. It was the skills of going through all the journals and figuring out how to get that information myself. That's what I valued. That's what was useful to me, not any of the lectures that said this fact and this fact and this fact. It wasn't until I read it myself that it was important.
Yeah. And very interesting you say that, because, my original degree was in linguistics, and my thesis was on, language acquisition of children with language difficulties and specific difficulty with Prader-Willi syndrome. And I did a lot of work in that. And then the other day I was doing a relief teaching, and it was a normal literacy lesson. And I could not get my head around any of it. And I was looking at this book, which you're reading through, and it's all these kind of what the value of this suffix and prefix is. And I remember thinking, geez, this was my degree. And all of these elements we're teaching to such young children. And I know that that's not going to be part of their adult life in a lot of ways. Maybe they understand, the epimetology of the word, but I was thinking, my goodness, this was actually my area of speciality. And I did that because I loved it. But are we teaching some of these concepts so young? You talked about Marie Montessori and some of those things we're just pulling down, but not at the right depth. Are we, there's some of these children are getting it, and yes, they're performing well on tests, as you're saying, but you ask them 2 years later, do they know? Is it relevant to what they're doing, I guess?
Yeah, that's right. I think that's what the beauty of what she did was that looking at it, she was an anthropologist, so she looked at it through a lens of like human needs, and she never shied away from like complex language either. Like that's interesting. That is like I'm looking from my perspective, looking at those are important parts of language. Yeah. But is there another way of teaching it? Like, do we have to teach like the high level theory, or could that have been a card sort where they just play around with the language and
Yes.
mess around and like bring the play back into it so that they're messing around with the words and seeing what happens. Then trying to tell someone what the value of something in a language is very difficult. Like that doesn't really work with language. It works
Oh,
in chess. I can
I
give you a
know.
numerical value, but again, as we know, that's not how you win chess. You don't win
No.
chess by taking the highest spot. It definitely has a huge advantage if you can do that. That's not necessarily how you win.
Yeah.
It's much more nuanced than that as in terms of and the
Yeah.
same too with language. Like what's valuable to you as a language isn't valuable to me.
No.
It's too difficult to put a number on or whatever or put a value
Definitely.
to.
And I think, both you and I started, knowing one each other through the STEM networks and that kind of 21st
Yeah.
century thinking that we talk about. And we talk about some of these elements and it's a skill based. And even when you're talking about the physics or the maths, and we categorize things very much in that mentality of kind of, well, if you're doing maths, it's very much an explicit where you just got to know it or you don't. But in that, we lose so much of the creativity. And that, I think, what STEM really came through was that we were actually seeking creativity through subjects that were really quite prescriptive. And that was our real intention, was that, actually, the creativity, we're letting it come through and we're letting have the individuality of a student to pursue those subjects, but in a really, I don't know, authentic way, I guess.
Yeah, and if you wanted to kill any of those STEM programs, the first thing you did was you put some sort of measurement in it.
Mm,
I don't know how many. Like I was banging my head against the wall, going like these programs. I know these are good. You just know when you've written a good program, and my
yeah,
children the students are not engaging. What am I doing wrong? And it
yeah,
wasn't until I just went right. I'm not measuring anything anymore. Mainly because it was like, well, this just seems like an arbitrary value I'm assigning
yeah,
to
yeah.
this. So I don't think my measurement's that good. So
No,
I'll worry about that later. We'll just make something, and then I'll figure out how to assess it. And when I did that, it was much better. Things were
yeah.
much. It was I'd say what I've found to be much more effective is when I went to the students. Okay, now you've made this. How would we grade this? What do you think is
Mm.
a good measurement for this? How could we? So if I go back to it was was it the gas masks? Was that the first time you and I
Yeah, it
I presented
was
that? Yeah, yeah. So that
steampunk,
was
wasn't it?
yes, the steam pump. That's right. Yeah. So we were making gas masks for chlorine attacks as part of
Mm,
a history, sort of
mm,
a steampunk history thing. I think the challenge was you've been given intel in the Battle of Ypres, and the Germans are going to use
mm,
chlorine gas. How can we make something that fits inside a shoebox that will
yeah.
protect you against the gas mask? And
Mm,
so we did whatever and we figured it out. And what actually was interesting was at the end of it, the students went, "Well, we want to test these." And I said, "Well, how would we do that?" No,
yeah.
fine, rightly, I had a good idea, whatever. And we came up with these ideas. And we kind of we eventually went to Michael's right and he's got the best idea. But the point was that they had the agency because they said,
Yeah.
this is how I want to measure it. And they came up with, I think we should time how long it takes for the litmus paper to turn
Mm,
color. Perfect. There we go. Because then that gives you an idea, like, because they said, well, we don't really care. We don't think it's going to stop the chlorine entirely because that's not the thing.
mm,
What we want is survival. So basically, can they run away from the chlorine? You're not going to stay there with your gas mask whilst chlorine's attacking all your skin. You're going to want to run away from it. So we
yeah.
just need you to survive long enough to get away from the chlorine. So
Yeah.
their measurement was we time how long it takes. And that was fun. We made that into a graph and we did whatever.
Mm,
And I have no idea what grade anybody got, but everybody
mm,
remembers whose gas mask lasted the longest. Because
yeah.
it was the lady who decided that vitamin C
Mm,
was the best method to do it. Or no, I
yeah.
didn't know it. I didn't do any of that research, no idea. But that's the thing. Like it was the measurement wasn't about the grade. It was about the experience and what
Yes.
we did. And I know every student learned something. Could I tell you what that thing was? Probably not. Like
No.
but that wasn't the point. Like they
Yeah.
still talk to me about that unit. Like that's still that class. When anytime I meet them in the street or I talk to them again, we talk about that
About
unit.
that.
And it's the only one I didn't put any tests into
No.
or any measurements into, you know.
Do you think there's an element in that, though, having that flexibility to allow student agency and voice comes from a place of being confident as a teacher in your own pedagogy? So I know that I am this kind of teacher and I've got enough skills in my toolbox to guide something. But, and I think maybe that's a security you have at Montessori, because you do a higher level of training from what your initial teacher training at university was. And we're seeing like the TALIS reports come out from, looking at that big part where actually some of the other countries perform well because some of the teachers have that higher level, or they have done a lot more research in education. Do you think that plays a part in terms of the confidence of your teachers going into those spaces where they're allowing student agency versus maybe students in a system where they're being told to run a program and actually they're not building their confidence?
Yeah, it's a system. Absolutely. Yes, our system is set up not only now to push back on the training thing. Yes, having more experienced teachers and training is important, but it's not everything.
No.
The only Montessori qualification I have is an AMI leadership course.
Okay.
So I don't actually have the, because I'm adolescents is my focus, and the training for adolescents is very difficult to access. And it was really difficult in Australia. It was actually impossible. And you had to go to America at the time, so that was really difficult. And my boss at that time was planning on bringing the training to Australia through that school. So we were doing on-the-job mentorship through him, as opposed to. So I don't have any official qualifications around Montessori.
No.
The thing that made me a much better teacher was that Dr. Pears was my mentor, I suppose, at that point, but he was the principal of the school, and he just had trust. And that was really, really important. He just went, I think you can do this. I think, like, whatever you think is a really good idea, run with it, because you've got the concepts, you've got open inquiry, which is what we want to see. We've got the students thinking, critical thinking. Those are the things we value. Write programs that do that. And if you can make it link with other subjects, even better. And to be fair to my team at that time as well, they also had the same mindset. Like, they were keen to get students to engage with English and just in interesting ways. And so, like, it was a very organic planning thing amongst us. The English teacher said, "This is the book I'm doing. It has gas masks in it. What could you do?" And I went, "Okay, what are you doing in history?" And he said, "I'm doing the Second World War." I went, "Well, perfect. There we go. We can make this all link together." And it would just, it was sort of kismet in many ways, the planets align. But I think that wouldn't have happened if we were like, well, what does the curriculum say?
Yeah.
We'd have gone, well, I'll have to teach them atomic theory, and you have to teach them the Second World War. Those things don't link. But they did link. Do you know what I mean? It was because we started with, like, what do we want to do that's cool and interesting first? What's the curriculum around that afterwards? The curriculum's not our focus. It's not the first thing we go to. It's a guide that we use. And when we go, well, once we're learning this thing, what's the link? And I sound like I'm very critical of curricula here when I'm having a conversation with someone who mainly deals with curriculum. But I'm not being critical. I actually think the curriculum is a very clever, very beautiful document in many ways. The way we teach here at the Montessori School, especially some life science teaching, is basically around student agency and the students. We have a theme, and we follow the theme, and we try and make things link with that. And when the students come up with the projects, sometimes I come up with the projects and it's challenge-based or problem-based. Sometimes the students come up with the projects. And you tend to find that the things that they're interested in are in the curriculum, because they naturally, once they get to the part where they're stuck and they are missing the knowledge to get to the next part, that's where the teacher slips in. And you usually find out that actually what you're missing is what's in the curriculum. And actually you're interested. And so what we found is that the students, they have the interest in this thing, they have the buy-in. And all you have to do now is just impart that knowledge at that point. And that's
very different from looking at curriculum outcomes versus the curriculum.
Yes.
And we get caught in that, what is an A, B, C, D, whatever it would be, and backward map, as opposed to going, what's the curriculum actually about that would be contextual to that child or that child, and not giving them that grade and saying, well, actually, they're only a C because they haven't actually fulfilled the outcomes of the assessment.
Yeah. And as part of, like, the reflection at the end of it, that's where that comes in. Like, a true assessment should be, you do the thing, and then we talk about what you've done, and then we talk about how you make it better. And that's what learning is. Learning is you got to go and make mistakes, and then figure out what you don't know, and then plug the gaps, and then remake it. No one writes a book and just hands it in and that's it done. It's the same thing with your learning. You shouldn't write an essay just once And I think
No.
that's the problem with following curriculum, is that you go, we must get through all these objectives. We must get through this as fast as possible. And what happens then is you miss out on that time. And time is
Mm,
critical. Like, it's really important to spend time. There's a speed at which learning happens, and you cannot go faster than that speed limit. Some people have a higher speed limit than others, don't get me wrong,
yeah.
but not everybody does. And to rush through things is to do a disservice to the thing that you're trying to learn.
Mm,
And and that's the other thing too, is that we should. I am all for having a curriculum that we respect and honor, because that information is it's the pinnacle of all of the greatest minds of our entire human history. When
mm.
we're teaching mechanics, we're teaching the work of Sir Isaac Newton. Sorry, physics all the time, physics teacher, but we're teaching the work of Sir Isaac Newton. Like,
Yeah.
that work is work that lasted us for 400 or whatever, 600 years
Mm,
before we figured out something else. Like, it was the basics of all the physics
yeah.
until Einstein and Schrodinger came along. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like, so it's not like this stuff isn't interesting and isn't incredible. So let's give it that honor, and don't just go, "Oh, it's just another thing I have to tick off and teach them," and then move on to it. And then have
Yeah.
they done it in a test? Cool. No, what it should be is like, this is amazing. Look at this. This is what humans have achieved. And
Yeah.
what could we achieve in the future based on standing on the shoulders of these giants?
Mm.
It's not what you do, it's how you do it. It's how you package the thing.
And
If you
it's
have to eat that curriculum, fine. Figure out a way to make it tasty at least.
Yeah, and it's understanding maybe the motivations of those individuals in history, what they did. And then, as you're saying, the back of Einstein would have had a huge impact, be influenced by Newton's theories. And you have to be able to question and be confident to question and say, actually, this is where we're at. And I think, probably you and I coming from overseas, what we learned about in history, I was using an example, is very different. And I found that quite difficult coming over here and kind of
Yep.
challenging myself to say, I didn't know about Gallipoli. I didn't know any of these things. And I've had such a very narrow lens of, and there's lots of different big social contexts in that, but I only knew history from one certain viewpoint. And I had to challenge it from different perspectives. And, I think that is something that even at that level, curriculum has to be adaptable. And we have to be able to put children in the spaces in which, if you look at Montessori, that you do think outside of your own area, and you
Yeah,
have those
absolutely.
values and challenge it.
Yeah, and our objectives are obviously very different as well as a result of
Mm,
that. And that is quite true. Yeah, well, it's as we moved here, suddenly you go, well, my information is not as valuable here.
yeah,
What I know about Irish history,
yeah.
valuable to Australians.
And experiences, you think about the context of Irish history to probably when, I know growing up in England, it was very relevant to the time of what was happening between the two countries. And so that made sense. But if I talked to someone over here about that and some of the experiences that we probably went through, which made it relevant, it's very distant to them and they can't
Yeah,
understand that. But
yeah.
similarly, I've got
Their
very limited.
context is, so that's why
Yeah.
there's so many Irish people here. It's not,
Yeah.
they don't understand the subtleties, the nuances of that relationship, and nor should they, because it's not their fight, it's not their
No.
history. Their history is very different. But yes,
Yes.
it does change your perspective, and that's again, and then that brings you back to, well, what actually is useful then? It's the skills of understanding history and understanding the relationships between people, being able to infer that and what that has for the broader context.
Yeah.
The famine did happen to Ireland, but the movement of the Irish people around the world happened to the
Mm.
world. And so,
Yes.
like, understanding what influence did that have on America, what influence did that have on
Mm.
Australia, you then understand why there's such strong connections between the Irish and the Americans,
Yeah.
because, well, all the money, and we'll don't even go into that, but you get my point. Like,
Yeah. 100%.
I learned as an Irish Republican, I learned British bad, they starved us.
Mm.
But actually, in the grand context of things, we learned why that was important to the world, and what did the world see as a result of that. And that's a very different learning experience and a very different way of thinking.
Yeah. And I don't think situations change. And I think we're still in a world where we have to challenge what's going on and challenge our belief systems in something and
Yeah.
be okay. And like Montessori does as well, you're not taking a linear approach to, and we take it a lot from our family or what we're hearing. And we often have these projections of viewpoints or whatever it would be. And therefore, education becomes such a crucial tool to allow children to have their own autonomy and to question maybe perceived beliefs or what's going on, which is really important. And I think we're lucky, say, in Australia and certain countries where we can see that and we can be part of different movements from a different viewpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. And the melting point of Australia is like one of its biggest strengths. In that, and again, we can all agree on, like, when you look at a curriculum, you can all agree on what's important information within that. But again, I think the best part of any curriculum document are the skills.
Yeah.
Like that's the part, and that's where I've always started, is like, well, okay, what skills would I like the students to learn? So whenever we design programs, it's always based on, okay, right now their skills are here, and I would like them to get better at this. And so everything that we do is based on that lens. So at the moment, my lens is I want students to get better doing the evaluation and the conclusion of the experiment. Because what I've realized is they draw a graph and they don't know why. Like, I've been banging on with it my entire career why you do graphs, but they genuinely don't see the value in the graph. Yes. They just all right, I'll do it. Can I do it in Excel? Yeah, you can absolutely do it in Excel. Don't ever show anybody a hand-drawn graph ever in your life, because it won't be very professional looking. But do that. That's fine. But can you talk to me now about, now that the work used to be draw the graph, because that was the hard part. And I think a lot of students, when I've done the hard part now, I've drawn the graph, it's taken me ages, and that's it. And we just stop there. And I'd say now that we can just chuck it into Excel, you could probably even just talk to Google Gemini and it would do it all for you. Yeah. What you do is you go, okay, now you need to talk to me about your results. You need to tell me tell me the story of that line. What has happened there? Can you give me maths to explain it? If not, can you tell me what happened? Do you think that line is true? Do you think that line is what was it about your experiment that made that line that shape? Like, if you change your experiment, how would that change that line? And that's what we're doing now, is we're looking at the stories of the lines. Now, what we can do any experiment on the planet with that as your context. If that's your starting point, you can do anything. And then you can go, okay, well, this is now the curriculum area that I've had as a result of that experiment. So that's why I've always liked doing skills first and focusing on the skills as my assessment. Because then I can go, so what we're doing at the moment is we're doing, if you drop a coin from the Eiffel Tower, will it kill someone? And the skills that we do within that are great. But what's very interesting is all the lines are different. No one has the same line. Yeah. And so now we have to go, well, why? You've done the same experiment. Why? And that's more interesting as a way of doing it. Yeah.
So when just going back to some of the original premise of greatness, and obviously our passion for any child is that they leave their education system with the potential to do great things, or what it would be. In your context, what would some of those key elements be that you have set a child up for the potential to be that, and whatever greatness would look like for each individual child? We know that's very different.
Yes. I think from my perspective as leader of a school, what I love about the students that leave our school is they know themselves.
Yeah.
And what greatness is for each child is obviously very different. And as a student leaves the school, what is it that looks great to them? And I think I do think, coming back to like the story of their journey is always much more important. I really like that about Steiner. So part of the Steiner education is that they actually, each student as they go through, writes like something that's sort of like their biography as they go through. So it's the story of their time at school. And so they create this beautiful document that at the end of it, you've got your story of your time at school. And there's something very powerful about that, because that's what we kind of value most, is the story of the student. Like, I genuinely can't remember the results of my student. I only had 2 students in physics last year. And I can't remember. I could give you a rough idea what their grades were, but I can't genuinely remember specifically what number they actually got, because I taught them since they were year 9, I think. Yeah. All the way through to year 12. And so, or maybe it was year 10 all the way through to year 12. But I had them through that time. And I remember a lot of things, but I don't remember what they got in their exam. I remember like the leadership things that they did. I remember the projects they did, the beautiful moments that they did. So one of the students that I had really struggled with presenting to groups, like could not do public speaking for for toffee, but she figured out that she could do it if it was children and not adults.
Yeah.
And her work experience was working in a bakery. And what she did was she found that to be actually one of the passions. So she's doing physics with me at this time. And as part of the IB, you have to do CAS, Creativity Activity Service. And so her service and creativity was to go and present to students how to make shoe pastries. And I remember that, like that means way more. Like her overcoming her fear of talking in a public space, bringing her passion, teaching children how to make shoe pastry, the actual shoe pastry itself, like all her skills that she learned outside of the classroom. That's what I remember.
Yeah.
Like, and there's, don't get me wrong, there's great moments within our classes, but it's not when she learned how to do the formula or whatever. It was the aha moments. It was the funny conversations, the in jokes that we had, and all those stories. That's what we value, and the greatness comes from those. It doesn't come from the exam. The exams, it's just a piece of paper. Like at its core, it's just a piece of paper that gets you wherever you're going next.
Yeah.
It's a ticket to the next part of your journey, and that's significant, but it's not the journey.
Yeah, and isn't that really interesting when you talked about, Marie Montessori being an anthropologist, so valuing the role of relationships, but also how we interact in that space. I think that's really it really gets to the crux of it. And I've always been very passionate that sometimes we get caught, especially when we're selling something, that we showcase those students who became professors, or were brain surgeons, or became a pilot, or whatever it would be, and we don't celebrate the person who overcome the biggest challenges to be the best version of themselves. The person who became the wonderful mother to the children, having been through a different experience herself, or whatever it would be. And I think I know as an adult now, if I go to a conference, the person who talks about their journey to get to where they were, I resonate so much with. I go, right. And I think Sarah Chapman, from Queensland, she did a bit of research on girls specifically, because that was her area, women in STEM, and she found that girls will often follow a pathway if they understand the emotional part of what that journey has been, and that resonates really strongly with them.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it feels very much as a culture shift as well, where we're less about titles and about, in an age of information, how much value is there in a master's or a PhD anymore? And and what is it about the PhD that's actually the important part? The important part is the work, surely.
Yeah.
It's not the title. The title's not the thing. It's what you do, how you get there, and your journey. And I would probably have much more interest in the journey and the work that you do to get there. And it's not that we devalue that, but in an age of information is not valuable anymore.
No.
Just for as a sort of thought experiment last night, I was messing around with Google Gemini. I asked it to design a master's course in philosophy for me. And it was, I was like, I don't care about having the title.
Yeah.
If I just wanted to do the work, would that be possible? And it designed a course. Now, is it university standard? Not sure. Probably couldn't make that judgment, and probably not. But does that matter? Would I get a lot of information about philosophy, enough to see me through my day-to-day life?
Yeah.
Through this course that I've created, and if I follow the readings, probably. And it just guides me in the right place. And as long as I've done the work, who's to say that I've not done a master's in philosophy? Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, but now, is that work real work compared to what you do at university? Those conversations you have with people who know what they're talking about. And I think that's an interesting thought experiment to do. I think in Montessori, we try to be as low tech as possible, because we recognize that when the iPad or whatever, the shiny object takes away from the experience, because the work's not being done. The work's been done by the machine, not by the person. And so we only bring the machine in if it's going to add something to the project, or it's going to add something we couldn't get otherwise. You can get that information from a book. And children love books. If you've ever been in a classroom of 10-year-olds and you give them a big encyclopedia, no more joy to be found than whenever they're flicking through the big, heavy reference books. Like the heaviness of the book brings them much more joy than the iPad. The iPad it's junk food joy. That's what I'm going to call it.
Yeah.
That when you're doing you find Google, you find information straight away. There's much more joy to be found going through and reading through all the texts. So if you just find the answer, you haven't found the context. So you have to actually read through all the contexts first before you get to the piece of information that you like or that you need. And quite
Yeah.
often you get that piece of information read through and you go, oh, what's next? And then you read the rest of the article. So there's actually the amount of information you're missing out on when you go Google something versus when you read it in a full text is, and not that you can Google stuff and read things through properly, but not many people are doing that. You don't if you can find a quick way of doing it, as we know from systems and what I've been talking about in the first place, if you can find the quick way of doing it, you do. The most efficient way to get a student to pass the test is to teach them the test. But that's not the best way to teach them how to be good at your subject or to love your subject or any of those other things. And I think we're kind of putting the cart before the horse when we're looking at how to get how do they do in their exam? Who cares? The exam should be a side effect of them loving your subject.
No one asks us what we got in our A levels for us. Oh Jesus!
I don't tell people because I'm embarrassed. But my A levels are terrible. But again, and they don't matter. It is an absolute privilege to be the principal of the Montessori school in Kingsley. In my view, it is the pinnacle of the things that I have achieved. My A levels are not relevant to the conversation unless you want to talk about someone overcoming terrible A levels. Do you know what I mean? Like overcoming, not enjoying school really that much, clearly, by the result. That's what my A levels tell you, is that I did not enjoy school.
Yeah.
But I still had teachers in there who influenced me enough, and I found enough joy within teaching people other things that I went, well, my results are terrible, but I'll become a teacher. That's fine. And you know what? I just found at any point in my life, I've just found the joy in the thing I do. I did sports science because I love fitness. I went off and taught science because I love the science element of sports science more than I enjoy the sports. Yes. And I've found my joy through all those things. And it just so happens that I was at the right place at the right time, in my view, to do. And I've done the work. I don't have the paperwork behind it either. I don't have the Montessori qualifications, the masters, any of those things. I've done the reading, I've done the experience, and I've found, but purely through my own just curiosity. I think that's kind of what's beautiful about our school is I found a school where the culture is to value the joy of the work.
Yes.
And as someone who values the joy of work, then it's a perfect fit in that respect. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love the way you talk about that, going in through science, very similar. I know we met through that STEM network. I have to say that I pushed back all the way through school to not do science. And then actually found that it was actually quite easy for me when I got into it. And I was like, right. But I had to, I pushed against myself and my beliefs of what it would be and kind of wanted to, really go my own path. And then came back to it when I was ready. And that's a big part, I think, of the journey.
And that's part of that. What we value as well. Readiness is a big part of our education system. You always at any Montessori school you have to juggle that readiness conversation. Some schools do where they do after around your birthdays you'll transition to the next cycle. So we do it on a 3-year cycle where you move classrooms. Sometimes you do it near their birthday, but sometimes it is when they're ready. And readiness isn't about academia. We have students who are gifted and talented, and we have a school where we could just pull them out of a year 6 classroom into a year 7 classroom very easily. We wouldn't even need to tell the authorities we were doing it because of the way we have our classrooms set up.
Yeah.
We could be teaching them year 9 content in year 7 easily. But readiness for us is a social thing, not an intellectual thing.
Yes.
It's all about, is this student going to get their needs met in that environment? And quite often the answer is no, because readiness is about development. It's about, if you can't relate to your peers, it's going to make learning very difficult, because so much of learning is about conversation and about talking. That's why we do presentations, because actually I don't care how you can be terrible with PowerPoint. It's the conversation you're having with me That's why we don't want them to just read the bullet points, because
Yeah.
I can do that. I want you to talk to me about it. Your learning isn't really happening until you talk about it out loud in some context. It isn't until you're actually processing it. And talking about it out loud does a lot for putting it into long-term memory and
Mm.
understanding it. And quite often you say things out loud for the first time and it seems like you've learned it, but actually you're learning it in real
No,
time as you go along.
exactly.
And that's why the social is so important. Your readiness is about, can you interact with your peers? Are your me or is the reason that you're in this classroom not do or not engaging with stuff because you're gifted and talented, or because you're actually developmentally ready to move to the next point? And that's really important.
Yeah, and I think thinking what you're saying about greatness, and I'm in my head, having come from teaching in, an alternative setting, and I think I questioned you on this one because I found it really difficult, was that intrinsic motivation and not the automatic praise. It's in my instinct to say, oh, well done for doing that. And that was really challenging for me because I really believed that that was the way children felt their importance or felt satisfaction. But in the sort of system that you work, it's very much an intrinsic way. So they're still developing their social skills, but they're developing their sense of greatness in themselves. They're not
Yeah.
benchmarking against their friend, and that fluidity that you have can provide that.
And it's also it's student dependent as well, to a point. Like,
Mm.
I quite like, it's the idea of like celebrating the valorization, not what they've done, just
Yeah,
celebrating they've had that moment of joy, and then being, yeah, that was cool, wasn't it? When you like, what do you praise at that point? Do you praise
yeah,
the hard work, or do you praise the outcome? Well, I'd say you should just. It's a tricky one to get right, because it's not like you'll never hear "well done" in a Montessori
no,
context. It absolutely,
yeah,
there are times yeah, well done. That was really tricky, and you actually
yeah,
managed to get past that. Well done. And I think that's the thing about. I think possibly because like the jobs everyone's completed, they've seen other people complete those tasks before. So like the completed task is no different to anybody else's completed task in many ways. So their
mm,
valorization comes from the work and overcoming that work and everything else.
yeah.
So
And definitely that kind of element that you're not, maybe you're getting a well done from a teacher, but you're not doing it for that reason. You're not doing
no,
it so you don't have to have that justification from a teacher that you're doing well. It's a lovely addition and it's great that you recognize, but that's not your intrinsic motivation to do
yeah.
something. It is in yourself.
Personally, I hate it. I really hate when people praise like something I've done. It really,
Yeah,
like, I mean, that's my own. That says more about me than it does about that. But
yeah,
knowing that, though, I know that like because it just takes away when you do it to a child. We did it actually on our leadership course recently. So they showed us a video of a child who completed a task, and we just watched like the skill of the teacher. And there was only one thing that one of the adults, I can't remember was the teacher or the A, but they did wrong. They said, "Well done" to the child, and you could see their smile drop just in that moment, because they weren't doing it for that. They were
no,
already celebrating within themselves the work. And it's really difficult, even in a Montessori setting, for you
yeah,
to just step back and let them have like you do need to find joy in your work and your joy, and you find the joy in that, but it's about going, that's happened for them.
yeah,
Let
yeah,
them have that, and just be the gratitude or whatever it is that you need to do in order to feel that, because you're not going to come up to work if it's not joyful. You're not
no,
going to
no.
like, money is not enough. I can tell you. I've worked have
The
all the years
holidays,
I've worked in the
surely. It's the
all the
holidays,
years
isn't
I've
it?
worked in the department. Like, I'm not for that system. I cannot work within that system. It's not for me. It might be for others. It probably is for others. That's fine.
Mm,
But I cannot find joy being in that system. Not necessarily, I enjoy the teaching and whatever else, but being part of that system, I was bored because I was too constrained. There was
mm,
too many things that I had to do that I didn't want to do, and I couldn't find. And it didn't matter how much you were paying me, and I was actually getting paid more in that system than in Montessori, and I
mm.
wasn't happier. The money
No.
doesn't make you happy, and we teach kids this all the time, and somehow we think that we're exceptions to this rule in some way.
Yeah. And we know we are looking at the shocking statistics of those leaving our profession, not because they're not passionate about teaching, but simply because of the burnout. And, schools do wonderful things, and we've got brilliant administration teams who are working so hard on well-being and trying to provide the best environment for staff. But by nature, we are teachers who will go to the nth degree for success for our students.
Absolutely.
And we will put all those hours in, and we'll put the pressure on ourselves. We'll push ourselves to the end of a term. We'll push ourselves to the end of the year. And that self-regulation is very difficult and has to come from a system level. Like, actually, I was thinking about this morning. I watched a Shark Tank clip of a young boy who was at a school, but he was running his own business, and he was getting up at 4 o'clock every morning. And then he was saying, "Oh, I do all my homework at recess because I don't want to miss time, and I want to have maximum." And I remember just my heart was sort of incredibly amazing, this child, but also that we caught ourselves in a trap that working those long hours and putting the extra work in is deemed successful, when actually our mental health and how we regulate, and our own, is very, very important.
And the long hours of work are a side effect of you having a passion for it.
Yeah.
It's because you want to do it, not because you feel like you have to do it.
Yeah.
Like that's, again, from my fitness endeavors, that's what I've also found, that I have got to the point now where I used to train 6 days a week because I thought that's how you become fit.
Yeah.
And it's not. It's, you got to find, like, I now train CrossFit twice a week. I went from 6 days down to 2 days, and I'm fitter now than I was from doing that. And I do little bits of things in between. I'm not saying that going twice a week is going to make you an incredible athlete, whatever.
No.
But I do a bit of cycling and a bit of other sports outside of it. And when you go back to the CrossFit, and this is my other cult that I'm part of outside of Montessori, is CrossFit. But when you go back to his texts, he said CrossFit was always about making you better at sport, and you should play different sports. If you want to get better at CrossFit, do more sports.
Yeah.
And when I took that, it's funny how when you take the advice on of the system itself, that you find your success. So yeah, I think it's, you got to find the joy again. It always comes back to that. You got to find your passion. You got to find how much am I genuinely enjoying this. And I will say, if you are a teacher and you are not enjoying your work, go find a Montessori school. Spend a ton of money. Guarantee. We've saved a few. I'm not like, that's not. I've saved at least 3 teachers who were ready to quit. Came and did a term supply at our school, and I found my joy again. So like, there's something there. That's a 3's not really enough for a sample size, but there's enough anecdotal there for me. That's a signal in my view. It's a 100% success rate from those 3 teachers that I've taken on, and they've all gone back into teaching and gone, this is brilliant. And yeah, just go find yourself a good Montessori school, and it'll make you appreciate. It'll make you feel some emotions. That's all I'll say. But yeah, it makes you appreciate like what there is another way, and if your only metric, my wife does this all the time to me. She says, "What was if your only metric was joy?" I was like, "Yeah, that's how I kind of live my career. It's like, it should be joyful, and that doesn't mean that every day I walk out of here with a smile on my face. That's not at all what it is. But it's the privilege of the work. Yeah, it's the privilege of the work, though. You know what I mean? Like, I think the great and powerful Jimmy Carr, who obviously controversial as a comedian, but he has some very incredible words of wisdom. I think he said he's read every self-help book there is, and he says that, like, pressure is privilege. If you've found the thing that you love, then the pressure within that thing that you love, the athletes, you don't ever see athletes who've like had the pressures of this incredible. They are some of the happiest people on the planet, and it's not because they won the trophies. It's because they've got the pressure of the job that they do, and like the pressure to perform. That's where they find their joy. The same thing applies to every single thing. We want to make things less stressful, but actually what we need to do is find something that when we are stressed out, we love the overcoming of the challenge. Once that challenge is overcome, we're ready for the next thing.
Yeah. And I agree there when you talk about those athletes. I think, and as soon as that gets taken away from them, we see how hard that is for them. And I think teaching as well as a profession, I know elements where if you've taken out of it, there's part of you missing, and it only takes a day back in the classroom or a lesson to go, this is what I love. Yeah, this is where I'm at. So yeah, definitely. Well, thank you, Michael. I could talk to you all day, and I'm sure the listeners would love it. But yeah, I think you've given us a real viewpoint, and we talk about, especially at AXA, it's about curriculum, debate, and conversation, and that's the important part of the crux. If we don't have that ability to talk and push boundaries and have those discussions, the curriculum doesn't work, and that is something we're really, really proud of. So yes, thank you very much, Michael. We'll
No problem.
put some
Thank you.
details in the comments if people would like to reach out to you. But it's been a wonderful conversation here today, and I hope many of them get benefit from it. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for your time.